Find something you love to do and go do it. Do not settle for the path that you think you have to be on. Just because your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were dentists doesn't mean you have to be a dentist. Just because your mom and your sister and your mother-in-law are lawyers doesn't mean you have to go to law school. You be you. Find something you love and go do it and be great at it.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Eric Brotman, who will share how to graduate instead of retiring in life. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote comes from Steve Jobs. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know it when you find it. That's our topic for today. Being intentional in your work and life so that you can be truly satisfied. When you love what you do, retirement is a dirty word. Before we get to that, let's review last week's action step, which was to pay attention to your breathing, to anchor yourself, to put down your phone and go for a walk. COVID caused a lot of people to do just this. Hopefully, they're still continuing. Just slowing down and being present while seeming so simple is so powerful. And I know you've heard this from many guests in the past. So make it happen for you. Do you do as Warren Buffett says and tap dance to work? That's our topic today. Creating financial freedom. Not only can you have a fancy house and a car, but you can have the time freedom to do what you love. It's possible over time, and we keep coming back to this. I hope you're working toward it or you've achieved this in your life. About the only regrets I have are not doing it sooner. Although I did love the time freedom I had when my kids were growing up, so no real regrets. Our guest is Eric Brotman, CFP. He is the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors and hosts of the Don't Retire, Graduate podcast, author of the book of the same title, and he's a regular contributor to Forbes.com. He and his team believe that financial literacy is the key to financial freedom, so they provide free and affordable education resources and accessible financial planning with no asset minimums. Let's meet Eric. Welcome to Richer Soul, Eric Brotman. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks, Rocky. I'm glad to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Not very much, frankly. School, I remember in third grade, I remember learning how to balance a checkbook and how to write a personal check, which I think put me ahead of a lot of schools because we actually got that, but there was no real financial training. There was plenty of math, but not personal finance. At home, money wasn't something we talked about, but I think I observed things that married couples fight about money a lot. And every now and again, I would bear witness to conversations that related around money. And often it was not the good stuff. So I would say that the lessons I learned about money were in the periphery from watching others, and often from watching others do it wrong. And I don't mean to disparage your mom and dad, but you didn't teach me. It's true.
Did you know then they weren't doing it right or wrong, or is that a reflection backward?
That's a reflection backward. I had no idea. My paternal grandfather, was a very successful dentist and built an incredible practice, and in fact was the team dentist for the Baltimore Colts in the NFL years and years and years ago. And he, through his endeavors, it was able to help make sure that I got an education. So I'm very blessed in a lot of ways. I'm certainly not crying poor. I grew up in a middle to upper middle class family. We didn't have money, but we also didn't go without. So I'd say it was a pretty good childhood from that standpoint. My grandfather made it possible for me to go to school and not have student loans, which put me ahead of the pack. I could graduate and not have to start in a hole. And so that was a blessing, and that's something that I have made sure to pay forward for my own daughter, is to try and make sure that her education is not something that'll saddle her for life.
Have you done anything to teach her about money?
I have, and it's been moderately successful. So what we did, there was a point in time she was probably 8 or 9 years old, and she approached her mother and myself, and she said, I'd like to get some allowance. And so it became a learning opportunity immediately. I got very excited about it because I didn't want an allowance to become an entitlement. I wanted it to be something where there's some age-appropriate behaviors or chores or things happening around the house to earn an allowance. So we found some age-appropriate stuff for her to do. And in order to get the allowance, and it was $5 a week, in order to get the allowance, she had to go to a craft store and buy, and she's very artistic anyway, but she had to buy 3 jars, and she had to label the jars. And the jars said long-term, charity, and fun. And every week I gave her 5 $1 bills. And every week I said at least $1 has to go to charity, at least $1 has to go to long-term. The other 3 can go anywhere you want. And so I watched her in the beginning, those $3 were going into the fun jar. But as the fun jar grew a little bit, and because there were ones, a lot of ones can look pretty substantial. It may not be a whole lot of money, but it's a pile of stuff, right? I saw her start to put more into the charity bucket, and I saw her put more into the long-term bucket. And then at the end of that first year, I took her to the bank. I introduced her to the bank manager, the branch manager. We opened an account for her with her long-term money. I matched it. She got a little learning, kind of like a 401k match. Whatever she saved, I matched. And we put it in the bank. And then in terms of the charity, we went online and we looked at some various things and found things that were reasonable age-appropriate stuff. And she chose something with kids and she chose something with animals, and it was great. And so we made donations, which I also matched. And she got the letters that said, thank you so much for these various things. And she started to learn about philanthropy. She started to learn about savings. One thing that was a little bit challenging was we got our bank statement. And I was excited to show her bank statement. And the interest, of course, was a penny, because nothing paid anything. And she said what any reasonable, rational person would say is, why in the world would I put all that money, which might have been $50, but whatever it was all that money. Why would I put that someplace if I'm only going to get a penny for it? I might as well just have fun with it. And that became a conversation about sort of the rainy day and the emergency, and also the opportunity that there might be something she wants to save for. And it went really well from 8 until, say, 10 or 11, at which point, I don't know if you have children, but preteens and now a teenager to be, they don't want to really do stuff around the house unless they absolutely have to. And her homework load is heavy. And so we sort of punted on the allowance and we punted on the chores around the house, and she's doing her homework. And she doesn't ask for money, so it's fine. But I think the lesson resonated. She still has those jars. They're just not getting filled every week, which is good. I got a $5 a week raise, Rocky.
So I have 2 kids. We did something similar. We didn't tie the allowance to doing stuff. Part of the reason was we started a little bit earlier, and we realized if we tied it to behaviors, we would start getting into arguments. Well, you didn't do that, so I can't give you this dollar. And I didn't want to deal with any of that. I wanted them to learn money. And so we didn't later on, when they got older, we tied it to, okay, if you want to earn extra money, here's a job for you to do that you can earn extra money, opt in, opt out. I don't really care. But it took all of the pressure off of that. I will say saving dollar bills and envelopes, like you said, it turns into a big stack of cash very quickly. And I think just naturally kids start to realize, oh, this is happening, and they can start to see the compounding. And so over that whole time, they've seen compounding. We stopped allowance when they were 18, but now they're in, their early 20s, and they see that long-term amount of money, because they always ask, what's long-term? And we said, well, it's not buying your first car. That's separate. It's not for college. It's maybe for a house, or maybe after you get married. And so we really, really put that delayed gratification and then the long-term stuff into there. My daughter doesn't fuss much with stock market and stuff. My son was having fun on Robinhood during the heyday. I guess, what was that, 2 years ago? And now it is slowed down, but that was good. I was really happy he was doing the crazy stuff, because the first lesson I taught him was, okay, you think you're smart. This isn't normal. Now he's seeing that, right? So he's experiencing it with small amounts, so that when it becomes big amounts, he knows what to do. And in the meantime, we told him, and we showed them both investment systems of how we do our stuff. So it's been all about learning that along the way.
That sounds productive, and it sounds great. And, pretty soon they'll be giving you an allowance. They're well educated. They're gonna help support you later. It's a good plan. They've got all that long-term money to take care of you.
Well, and that's funny, because my son and my wife argue, and my son said to my wife, he goes, I don't care about your money. You can keep it. Actually, you guys should go spend some of it, because we won't need it.
Which is good.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember saying to both of my folks, you don't have to leave me a nickel, but please don't put me in a position where I'm paying your bills. We've got our own, we've got our daughters. Maybe we'll be blessed with grandkids someday, and not someday soon, but someday. And as long as you don't leave me with bills, I don't need anything. I'm good. I was launched. I was educated. I'm self-sufficient in every way, and have been since my early 20s, and that's a good thing.
It is. And today, I guess it's becoming a rarity.
Well, there are lots of reasons to live on your parents' couch. Some of them are productive reasons. There are lots of people who we see who tell their kids, when you graduate, come home for a year or two, bank everything you earn. It'll make a huge difference. And as long as they're working and earning and banking it, it can be a very helpful thing. On the other hand, if it's you don't have to get a job, come home and sit here and play Xbox, that's not a good thing. So it's not the staying at home or the coming back home or the boomeranging that's necessarily the problem. It's the reasons why. Is it to avoid adulting, or is it really to bank tens of thousands of dollars, which could be very beneficial down the road?
And I think it's more avoiding adulting. B, a big part of it is their parents never had the conversations. And so they're coming out and going, what do you mean I have to pay back this college loan? What is this college loan? The school never told me I had to pay it back. I thought it was an award.
Oh, it's an award. All right. Wear that like a blue ribbon. It's an albatross.
It is very much an albatross. All right. So you grew up in the middle-class family, learned a little bit about money. How did you get into the financial advising business? What drove you in that direction?
It was a natural transition. I was an English major. So naturally, I went directly into finance. That's a true story. I studied English and psychology and was planning to go to law school. And had done some internships and loved this idea of going to law school, and thought I would do tax law or corporate law or estate law or something that was both math and legal. And I took my first job out of college at a brokerage firm here locally in Baltimore and was in the legal department. And within a year, I had fallen in love with the financial side and out of love with the legal side. And to this day, I credit that experience for not going to law school. So the fact that I worked a year first and it talked me out of going to law school saved me 3 years, tens of thousands of dollars, and a lot of heartache. because I wound up finding exactly what my calling was. And part of it was understanding that the financial planning business is less about math and more about relationships and people. And there's a lot of behavioral and psychological aspects to what we do. And so it was a great way to be communicative. It allowed me to speak. It allowed me to write. It allowed me to communicate and to make a difference in people's lives. And I didn't have to be in a situation where with the legal piece of it, especially the estate planning piece, my first job was cleaning up the mess after it happened. I learned what it was like to tell somebody, I'm sorry that your husband died, but his ex-wife is still his beneficiary, and that's what's going to happen. I was 21 years old, and I'm answering questions like, well, I know you have 3 siblings, but only one of them is on mom's IRA. It was horrible because there's nothing you can do. When somebody dies, there's nothing you can do. Now, you could get ahead of it. You can help plan to make sure that doesn't happen. And I get to do that all the time now. I'm an accredited estate planner. I just didn't go to law school, so I don't draft documents. But getting into the financial world was a total accident. I'm glad it happened. I love it, but it was a total accident.
You were lucky. You accidentally found
I think so. I did. Whether it was kismet or happenstance or dumb luck, it was exactly the right place for me. And that was going back 30 years.
Wow, a long time.
Yeah, no, I've been at this my entire adult life, essentially.
So we were just down at FinCon. Did you get a chance to meet Brad Klontz? Do you know him? And
I don't know if I know Brad or not. I was there and obviously had a great experience there, as I always do, but I don't know if I know Brad.
Brad does the psychology side of financial planning.
Okay.
And so it's more about the money behaviors, the money scripts from childhood and all of that. So since we were all there, I wasn't sure if you saw that. I know they're working on a program. I think it's this CFP is now pushing for CFPs to learn psychology of money so that they can deal with behavioral issues of their clients.
It's more important than the logistics. I took my CFP exam in 1998. There's almost nothing that I studied then that's remotely relevant now, but the psychology would be. Honestly, the limits don't matter. The laws have changed. There's this act and that act, and 100 things have changed since then, 1,000 things. But what stays the same is sort of the process and the thought behind what planning is, and then the human aspect of it. So I think that's great. Behavioral finance is fascinating. I've not only taken courses on it, but Daniel Crosby has written a couple of books on it and is, I think, one of the bright minds in that space. And I believe that the behavioral impact is larger than the financial one in and of itself. Is he on your bookshelf?
He is. He was on our podcast to talk about his book, The Laws of Wealth. He was on a while ago.
It's a phenomenal book, and he's an incredibly bright guy, but also a really sort of charming and likable guy, and somebody you can have some fun with. There's plenty of people who write finance books who are not a whole lot of fun at cocktail parties, but I suspect he might be.
Yeah, he was wonderful. Great, and he's a great speaker. And so speaking of fun guys in financial planning, Brad's got a massive TikTok following, so you got to figure out.
Whatever he's doing on TikTok, I don't know that I want to know. I remember I have a teenage daughter. TikTok is banned at our house. There is no TikTok.
Maybe you could get her to watch the financial planning one. You're only allowed to watch this.
I can't even get her to watch my show. Why is she going to watch somebody else's show?
She's not going to watch your show, please.
No. She's sick of seeing me on TV.
And that kind of brings us to your book, because it's that bringing together life, money, finding your calling. It's not what we're taught in school. It's just totally different. And I think this is where people struggle, because everybody wants to retire. And when I look at retirement, it's like being put out to pasture. And the studies show that literally a lot of people who retire don't last very long. No. The whole premise of the book is making retirement a graduation to the next phase of your life that's exciting, that's something to look forward to, not a disappearing act. And getting to financial independence is an incredibly wonderful goal. But retirement in its traditional sense is torture. I don't know why anyone would sign up for it unless you were too unhealthy to do anything productive.
You don't go from 50 or 60 hours a week and having this robust network and making a difference and being an expert in your field and having a 40-year vitae to Oprah and shuffleboard and thrive. You just don't.
I don't disagree with you. So what inspired you to write the book, Don't Retire, Graduate?
The book, it's my third book, and I think my last book. If I ever write another book, Rocky, it's going to be a romance novel. I think this is my last book because I think I finally found my voice. You know, I had written a book on getting out of debt, and I had written a book about building wealth, and both of them I thought were helpful, but not page turners. You know, they weren't the kind of thing, and they certainly didn't create a brand. Don't Retire, Graduate has created a bit of a brand for me. It's a calling for us. So we created a financial planning for all platform. We've put out, as a firm, we've put out some financial literacy courses, some of which are free online. And hosting a podcast by the same name has made this more of a brand than even our company's name. I mean, there are lots of people out there who know me as Don't Retire, Graduate. They don't know BFG Advisors from ABC. And that's okay, ultimately, because the brand will lead folks to our intellectual property and so forth. But I wrote it because I thought the schools were failing folks. I thought parents were doing no service to young people. And I thought that working your whole life so you could not work and could sit at home is a tragic way to end a life that could have been well lived. And so I just think people are doing it wrong. And that's not to suggest that I have all the answers. I sure as heck don't. But I know what I don't want to do is I don't want to become irrelevant and invisible at some age just because it's an arbitrary number.
I don't disagree. Before we get to that, though, I think you need to change the name of your company to DRG Financial Advisors.
Yes, you're right. In fact, I had thought that I would just do DRG as Greek letters and create a fraternity. I did think Delta Rho Gamma could be a thing because it's not a thing. And so, you know, maybe you'll see sweatshirts and ball caps with DRG all over it. I don't know. Maybe.
That'll be living life to its fullest. And I think that's the thing. People don't realize that you can retire at a young age in the sense of what you do is fun and on your terms. And if you can do that, that's awesome. And if you can find your calling and have that ability, that is super, super awesome. And I think that's our big goal for our kids is, hey, by the time you're 30, you should have enough freedom to truly choose your choices and have the financials to make those choices and to do it right. But we aren't being taught how to do this, and we aren't being taught to work in things that are fun. Like what's Warren Buffett says, tap dance to work, and you'll never work a day in your life, right? Find what you love. For me, it took forever. I mean, it was in my early 50s by the time I figured it out, but it's definitely a thing.
If you get up out of bed every morning and you're looking forward to your day, it's a great thing. If you get up every day you're dreading it. Oh, I got to go to work. I can't wait till Friday at 5. That's a miserable existence. And I know some folks are in it, and sometimes there's not a lot of choice. And I empathize with that. But if you're in a situation where you can build a financial future that's reasonably independent and that you can create that choice for yourself, you can find things you love to do and you can do them. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be for money at a given point. If you've built enough wealth that you're working for fun, you can do volunteer work and pro bono. You can do adjunct faculty. You can do teaching and consulting. You can start a company. You can be entrepreneurial. You can do anything you want. And that's, I think, the key. Freedom is priceless. Independence is priceless. And in the absence of that, you're just sort of punching somebody else's clock.
And that's what it's all about, is freedom. It's not about fancy stuff. It's about time freedom and being able to figure out how to do that. I was thinking of doing the teaching, and then I saw what everyone else's kids were like. I'm like, no, I'm skipping this.
I was adjunct faculty. I taught the CFP curriculum at a local university here for adult learners. And they were all there because they wanted to be there, and they were sponges, and it was great. And that's different than teaching kids who have to be there and can't wait to get out. Totally different experience.
Correct, because the latter is essentially what we're talking about, right? They're doing what they love. The former is doing what they're told. And I think that's a big part of the problem. One of the things you talk about in your book, which I love, and it's one thing I've always said, is run your personal finances like business finances, right? Create your balance sheet, create your income statement, see what's going on within your finances. I'd love for you to expand on that.
When you run a business of any kind, whether it's a lemonade stand or a global enterprise, one of the things that you work towards is profitability. In our households, we don't think of it that way. Our household isn't a for-profit entity per se, so we don't think of it that way. But if you don't make more than you spend and generate a profit that way, then you will eventually run out of money. The question is, how long does it take and how ugly does it get? So figuring out what you need to put away is basically your profit margin. And if you say, I need to save 10 or 15 or 20% of what I earn and make that the long-term investment or savings, or that's where I'm going to build my wealth, what you're really doing is saying, I'm going to run this household like a business with a 20% profit margin, which is healthy. That's great. And if you do it and you won't hit it every year. There'll be years where there's a hiccup. There'll be years where there's an economic issue or a job loss or a medical problem or just something happens. But if you have a balance sheet and you can track what your net worth is over time, first of all, it's exponential. I mean, the difference between your net worth at age 22 and 23 might not seem like much, but the difference between 22 and 52 is a big deal. And the curve is profound, and it takes money to make money. You know, if you have, for example, if my first job, I got paid 18 grand a year. It was not a lot of money. I couldn't afford cream cheese on my bagel in the morning for breakfast. But nonetheless, it was 18 grand a year. Well, think about it. If you have $1 million built up in any type of savings or investment and you're pulling, say, 4% from that account, hypothetically, it's paying you $40,000 a year. Your money ostensibly could be paying you more than your first job did by 2 to 1. And that million becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. And not everyone's going to get that many iterations of it. But, you know, I heard something said once that I really liked, and it was, anything that's not impossible is therefore inevitable. I think it was Nick Murray who wrote that. Anything that's not impossible is therefore inevitable. It's just a matter of how long it takes. And so for some people, that curve starts a little later, and for some, it starts a little earlier. But if you figure out not only your income statement, which is assets, which is income minus expenses, in your household, it's salary and other income versus what are we spending? If it's positive at the end of the year and you've done it on purpose and paid yourself first, you'll be ready to go.
And those are the principles that I live by. Pay myself first, automate it, let it compound over time. And like you said, the longer you have, the better the chances. I was reading somewhere, Warren Buffett's, the majority of his billions came after 65. Like 90+% of it, I think, is all the compounding because he's lived so long and he doesn't spend it, right? He keeps it. And I think that's what people don't realize. You've got to create that gap. And, you know, a lot of financial planners talk about 10 or 15%, which I think is ludicrous. You should be at like 20 or 25%, or at least work towards that. Because that's the kind of margin that really powers that curve super fast up and allows you to do it. We've always run our finances on software. Back when computers were run on DOS, we had DOS-based software to track our stuff. And I can go back 30 years and show you how my spending's changed and where it went and how it grew. And it's a hockey stick.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, I've been using Quicken for many, many years, and I use QuickBooks for the company. It's the same premise at home. What's coming in, what's going out. I agree with you that 20 or 25% is good, although I would say any number you choose is a little bit arbitrary until you've gone ahead and done some hypotheticals to figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish. You have to save a whole lot more of your income if you'd like to be financially independent at 45 than at 65. For example. I mean, that's just the hockey stick has to go steeper and faster, which means it needs larger inputs if you're trying to start younger. And the FIRE movement of financially independent early is really based on this idea that you can live cheaply. And while I think it's great to be financially independent, I don't really want to live that cheaply. I'd rather have an abundance mindset than a scarcity one. And so I sort of wrestle with that a little bit.
I'm in the fat fire group.
Yes, I like that. I like that. I don't know how I feel about being lumped in with the fat folks, but yeah, I like the fat fire group. Why not?
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And again, you have to figure out what works for you. I think, when you're young, stay lean, and then you can grow over time. But if you grow a few years behind your income, then you're constantly able to stay ahead of the curve. And I think that's the key. What happens, I think, too often is people let their spending get ahead of their income, and they can never get off of that. But if you allow your income to stay ahead of your spending, over time, your income goes up. You're surely not making 18 grand a year right now. And so you can start to spend more and splurge. You can get the fancy cream cheese if you want.
Yeah. I got lots of options now. It's a full spread, right?
It's a full spread. Well, because you did the right choices. Now it's an irrelevant conversation. And I think that's the key. One of the other things that you kind of talk about in the book, and it's a part that people, I think, ignore, which is risk management. And a big part of risk management for me, everyone thinks about life insurance or car insurance. Very few people think about disability insurance, because if you're disabled and you can't earn, now you've got real trouble. And disability is not a very expensive type of insurance to get, unless you're a parachuter or something like that. And then your rates go through the roof.
Well, it does depend on what you earn and what you're trying to do in your occupation and so forth. But I think risk management as a whole gets a bad name because people don't like insurance. They don't like insurance companies. And insurance companies have earned that reputation, by the way. Insurance companies are in the business of not paying claims. They're in the business of being profitable for their shareholders in most cases. And so they will try to avoid claims if they can. And that makes it a constant battle. And therefore, people don't like insurance companies. That being said, if you don't have a moat around your castle, all you're doing is inviting in invaders. So to me, building wealth is not, and there are lots of kinds of wealth. Some of it is financial wealth. Some of it is personal wealth. You have wells of experience and so forth, but you need to protect it. You need to have security around it. You wouldn't park your and I'm going to say Ferrari, although frankly, we're talking finance. That's the worst thing you could do is blow money on a car. But I'm going to say it anyway. You wouldn't park your Ferrari out in public and leave the keys on the hood. You know what I mean? You would protect it. You'd put it in a garage. You'd probably cover it. You'd do all the things you needed to do to protect it. And that's true for everything. So there's a reason why we have cybersecurity. There's a reason why we have identity theft coverage. Some risk management has nothing to do with insurance. Some of it has to do with best practices of protecting yourself, protecting your identity, protecting your accounts and your information, and then, of course, your person. And I would agree with you with disability. I think in most cases, the biggest asset we have is our earning potential. I mean, people don't think of it that way. Well, if you had a goose that laid golden eggs, would you insure the eggs? Well, yeah, maybe. But you better insure the goose because you're going to get more eggs that way. And disability insurance is just about insuring the goose that lays the golden eggs. The golden eggs are your paychecks.
That they are. And again, it's one of those things that we aren't taught in school. No class in college teaches you how to look at risk management, how to do these things in your personal life. And what I find, it really depends. I mean, if you get a white collar job, they hand you all these benefits. For a lot of the other people, they don't even think about risk. And I'm always shocked to see, especially the tradespeople, it's not even like a conversation. It's like, but you're working hard. Like your chances of an accident are high or getting hurt. And why wouldn't you want to protect that income? And it just seems kind of silly, but everyone has their own choices.
You mentioned employee benefits. And the problem is, first, HR departments aren't allowed to give you any guidance on them. It's against the law. They can't give you guidance on what to choose in your 401k. They can't give you guidance about which benefits to choose. All they can do is make it available. So when I got my first job, and again, we're going back many years, but I was handed this packet of stuff. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I hadn't been taught that. I didn't know what to choose. So I did what any logical 21-year-old would go. I asked my parents, who made the wrong decisions with and for me at that time. I know this now. Sorry, guys, I'm beating the heck out of you on this show. I'm not going to let you listen to it. But it's still true today. Employee benefit departments, these books, these handbooks are massive. You need some help going through it sometimes and figure out which health plan does make sense. There are companies, we represent some folks at companies who have very, very nice benefit packages, but you have to opt in for some of them. There are people who don't opt in for the disability insurance, and it might be $2 a check. And it's a lot of coverage, but you have to opt in. You have to know to do it. People aren't using their health savings accounts properly. That's a huge tax opportunity. They're not contributing enough in the retirement plan to get a match. That's leaving money on the table. There's so many of these examples, and they don't name beneficiaries, Rocky. People do not name beneficiaries. They assume that their will, if they have one, will cover it. It won't. You have to name beneficiaries on these accounts. And so part of risk management and part of financial planning is going through and making sure T's are crossed and I's are dotted, because usually they're not.
See, that's all natural to me, so I assumed everyone else did it. I guess not. And we started off with that conversation of where you started with work. People don't even take their ex-spouses off of things, which is
that's right.
Horrifically. And I've heard those stories multiple times. So I know it's true. It just amazes me that people wouldn't take the time to fix it.
It's just not top of mind. People are busy and they're distracted by everything. I mean, we are barraged with to-dos and tasks and messages, and some of it's important and some of it's nonsense, and it's hard to tell the difference. And I don't know about you, but I spend most of my day, it seems, in email hell. I've got people helping, but it's just it's an avalanche of information, some of which you have to distill and do something with, most of which you don't. And we're bombarded by that. And then if you've got kids at home and you're dealing with their homework and their teacher stuff and something's wrong with their Chromebook and oh my gosh, this, that, you're not thinking about this stuff. And people don't, unless you have an appointment, unless you have a financial advisor, somebody's going to sit down and say, all right, it's time. Let's do this. Let's make sure we do it. People don't. It's an accountability partner. I don't know about you, but if I didn't have a trainer, I would not work out. Not because I'm lazy, but because I'm busy. But if I have a trainer and I know I've got an appointment at 4:00, you better be sure I'm going to be there.
And we need trainers in all parts of our life to help us with that and to help us discern the information, make the right choices, and hold us accountable to making those choices. And that's just the reality of it. And get help if you need help. Find good people. And that's the other problem, is always finding good people, which is not always easy. So I will give you that. But there are ways to learn it yourself. And today, more than ever, information is more widely available. It's just go find it and make it happen. So I want to kind of switch gears here, because we're in interesting times. And I think people aren't going to know how to deal with inflation. And one of the things, like when we talk about assets in the past, everyone thought of their home as an asset. I think in the future, one of the biggest assets people are going to have, and they don't necessarily know how to deal with it, is a fixed rate mortgage that they got 2 years ago at sub 3%. Because, in today's, I don't know what current interest rates are on a 30-year, but they're probably in the high 7s, 8s.
Yeah, they're 7 again.
They're 7 again. Something. Right. Which, honestly, when I bought my house, I think we paid 7 3/4, and that was 20 plus years ago.
That's funny. Mine was exactly the same. 7 3/4. And it was a decent deal, because that was not only the prevailing rate, but that's pretty typical. Mm-hmm. Well, we got 2 generations who've never seen any of this before right now. 2 young adult generations who have never seen this before. It hasn't happened in 40 years.
So I think people getting used to that. And then the second thing is, I think it changes the way you think about real estate. I think a lot of people may feel stuck because they're like, hey, even if I move across the street and buy the same priced house, my payment just went up 50%, not on top of whatever the differential in the houses are. I think people are going to start thinking about become a landlord. Because if you've locked in this house and you've locked in this low rate, it might make sense for you to change the way you do things going forward. And it gives you the cash flow then to pay the next mortgage and be able to do that. But I think people are going to need to be more inventive and find new and better solutions to whatever their financial choices are.
All of the assets we have a measurable financial value to them. So, whether you own a stock or bond or fund, or whether you own a house, whether you have a savings account, whether you own a life insurance policy and it's got a value to it, whatever it is, a lot of times we don't look at those values and we don't consider how we can tap into or use those accounts. And so for years, money was so cheap that a home equity line of credit was the solution to everything because it was almost free. And you can do lines of credit against your securities accounts. You can do lines of credit against your life insurance. There's lots of ways to get financing because if you have collateral, but none of them are good deals anymore. Borrowing is no longer the bargain it's been. And so like yourself, I bought my first home at 7.75% or so. And my mortgage now is at like 2.25% or 2.125% or something completely ridiculous. And so when mortgage rates are higher and you're trying to consider the next home, it's important to be paying some extra toward the mortgage, maybe lower it a little bit, do what you can to create equity. When your mortgage is at 2.5%, it makes no sense in most cases to put extra money toward it. Because why would you, if you can get 4 or 5% in a CD at the bank, why would you put extra money at 2% toward your house? You wouldn't. It's arbitrage. And that's hard to deal with because people are naturally debt averse. I don't think it's necessary, especially in an age where if you're in a home where you talked about using it as landlord or as rent, but if you're in a home where you can actually age in place, where you're not going to have to move, where you'd like to stay long term, the advent of reverse mortgages and ways to tap equity mean that you don't necessarily have to be mortgage free when you retire. You might be able to become payment free in a different way. And there are ways to untap your equity, which is a huge asset that usually sits on the sidelines. So I think thinking about the equity in your property, whether it's your real estate, whether it's rental real estate, whether it's other kinds of property, I think it makes an enormous amount of sense to really figure out how you can utilize it. And right now, borrowing against it is not optimal anymore. It was for a long time. It's not anymore.
Kind of getting back to inflation, I don't think people realize how much inflation will hit them. So I remember when my dad bought his house, and I remember what his mortgage and his tax payment was. 20 years later, he paid off the mortgage, but his tax payment was now more than the mortgage and tax payment. And on the same side, I saw a lot of people in that time period, because they bought their houses and they kept them, it was an inflation hedge for them because rents had skyrocketed. And so if you're going into a fixed income situation where your income is not keeping up with inflation, owning the house at least locks your payments. So this is things that I've constantly been, the advice I was giving 2 years ago is not the advice I give today. 2 years ago, hey, get rid of the debt, pay down your mortgage. It's great to sleep at night. Today, it's like, hey, if you still have a low rate mortgage, do not pay it down. Do something else with your money. And now I think there was a toss up, rent versus buy. It's constantly been a toss up. In a high inflation market where rents are going up 10 and 15% a year, being able to lock in one of your biggest costs, which is housing, I think is important to be able to do.
I agree with you. I also think if you have enough cash that you can downsize and buy, even if you have a mortgage still on your home, if you're downsizing and you can pay cash for your next residence, that changes the game. I mean, that's a big deal. And with housing prices going up so much since the 08-09 collapse of real estate, there's a lot of people with a lot of equity out there. And the only The only thing that makes sense in this environment with high interest rates and reasonably high home prices, although I think the pendulum is starting to swing, but they're still pretty high. This is not a time to upsize. This is not a time to buy the next house and have to finance it and take that on. It's not real favorable. It's a great time to downsize. It's a great time to downsize and pay cash or to stay put. It's a good time to do absolutely nothing, which naturally is inertia is what we're all best at. So do absolutely nothing. If you already have your mortgage set, I feel for the folks who had adjustable mortgages who didn't lock in when they could have, because boy, oh boy, are they in trouble. The writing was on the wall for so long. I mean, I think it was like 8 or 10 years that I was telling folks interest rates have to go up eventually. And I was wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. And now, I'm right. but it had to happen. I can't believe it took this long. It was artificial. It was government imposed. It started as long ago as 9/11, when 0% car notes became a thing because we wanted the gross domestic product of the country to stay and we wanted consumers to buy cars. So it's been now 21 years. And we're just starting into another cycle that I think it's going to be a painful cycle for a lot of folks. I just had to renew my electricity for 3 years at the house. It is 50% more than it was. 50. That's not just inflation. It's also commodity costs and other things, I realize. But that's a big deal. And I'm blessed that it's not going to change my life. It's going to irritate me, but not change my life. But for some people, that's going to be a big deal.
It is. And I know our electric costs have skyrocketed to the point that now I might think about solar. But we still have to figure out what our long-term choices are. Again, where do we retire in place? And we're not going to, technically I'm retired.
Where are you geographically?
Straight north of you, Harrisburg.
Okay. Oh, so not far at all.
No.
Okay. So Pennsylvanians, they tend to retire in Delaware or in Florida. In Maryland, we all go to Naples. In New York and New Jersey, they all go to Boca. It depends where you want to be and whether you want a warmer climate and everything else. But usually there's a move for tax reasons as much as anything else. Tax and climate.
So I'm going to challenge climate, and I'll tell you why.
Go for it.
Looking at the temperatures in the South this summer, I don't like 95 to 100 degrees and humidity. And I actually Googled the top 20 climates because I'm like, I'm not living in San Diego because of the economics of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Pennsylvania, actually, this area came up in the top 20 for climate. It's because we're never super cold. We get cold, but we're never super cold. We get warm, but we're never super warm. We don't have tornadoes. We don't have earthquakes. We rarely have a hurricane. We don't see a ton of snow. We get snow once in a while. It's fun. And then your life goes back. And so I was like, well, maybe I should just stay here.
Well,
we'll see.
You certainly can. You're talking to somebody who also doesn't like the heat. I mean, I have vacationed on the Arctic Circle. I'm good with cold, cold, cold. And I've friends in Winnipeg. I could see myself there. But folks go to Florida because there is definitely a lifestyle there that's very senior friendly. But it does get hot. And I think a lot of the folks who do it most successfully are folks with enough wealth to snowbird, where you spend a couple months of the year in Florida, but you're not there in July and August.
And I think that was kind of the conversation that my wife and I had. She's like, she's finally coming to the agreement that we might just become snowbirds. We'll be here, and when winter comes here for 2-3 months, we go down there and we come back and we move back and forth. And the reality of it, the way I built my business, we can go anywhere. And right. As long as I'm in reasonable time zones to the United States, plus or minus 4 or 5, I'm okay. And I think that gives us the ability to go quite a bit of places, especially South America, and the opportunities that are there. And you do geo arbitrage and pick up on low cost of living. I mean, I'm still young enough that I got to deal with health insurance, which is, I don't think people realize how expensive it is when you need to go into the open market and plan for that.
Yeah, no, having health insurance through an employer, and that's a hot potato too, because I'm not sure why employers have to be involved in insurance whatsoever. But But we are. And so when you're involved in the health insurance marketplace, it does make a huge difference to subsidize that for employees. It's a big deal for the employees. But, if you leave the permanent workforce more than 18 months or so before Medicare, it's a real challenge. It does get expensive, and it's kind of an unpleasant experience. I've seen folks do it, and it doesn't look great.
No, it doesn't. And we just plan for it. That's all we can do is say, this is what it's going to cost, and we'll just have to suck it up and pay it. And you figure out how to play around with deductibles and everything else to make it work. Are you familiar with how we ended up with employer health care?
I've heard this story more than once, and I don't retain it. I think I've repressed it. So why don't you enlighten me again? I'm going to nod and smile and be like, oh, yeah, that's exactly right. But it baffles me that we're responsible for that. But go ahead, enlighten me again.
So back in a time very similar to now, where the government was interfering with the economy, they pretty much said, you can't raise wages. They locked wages down because they had to deal with inflation at that point. And so by holding wages constant, employers couldn't pay more. So what do you do when you can't pay more? You give more. And so then they started giving health insurance as a way to add to how they could compete in the marketplace. And then it just became an entitlement.
And then you can't get rid of it.
And now you can't get rid of it. But I think what really should happen, and I don't think does happen, or it happens in a way that's not clear to most people. I think if employees were handed a report that said, here are what all your entitlements cost us for you, I think they would. Well, again, it comes down to they don't value it.
No. And in fact, we've done that, and it is not helpful. And the reason it's not helpful is that when you ask somebody, in fact, even bonuses, people who earn bonuses, sometimes it can be problematic because when you ask somebody what they earn, they only think of their base salary. And the cost of benefits or bonuses or profit share or all these various things might be another 50%. But when you're asked, what do you earn? Base salary is the number you peg. So finding a way to increase base salaries without creating a lot of those other things actually makes employees happier. It might be the same dollars, but all of the benefits and perks and extra things, the fact that we pay half their FICA taxes, they don't care because anybody's going to do that. We pay for your unemployment. We pay for workers' comp. This, that, and the other thing, but that's irrelevant. That's the cost of having employees. And so, and I don't say this disparagingly, I'm certain that if I was hired by somebody else, I would not necessarily think of that as, I might now because I've owned a company for all this time, but when I was first hired, I didn't contemplate. All I knew was what my salary was. And beyond that, I really only knew what my take home was. The fact that I knew my salary was 18 was because, by golly, that was my first salary and I was going to remember it. And I do. And when I got my first raise from 18 to 19, I resigned that day. I couldn't live on that. I was like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find another path. I can't, this doesn't work. I qualified for electric assistance. It didn't make sense to me. I said, I want whatever work that I do, I want my output to create my income. And that doesn't happen in a lot of places.
I guess I'm just weird. When I contemplated job opportunities, I even used it as negotiating skills. I'm like, hey, their 401k gives me 6 versus your 4. And so that's 2% I'm leaving on the table. They do this. How much does your healthcare cost me? Well, this is what I'm paying now. So there's a differential to you. And I was lucky that some of the companies I worked for actually matched my donations. And so, hey, do you match donations? Because if you don't, that's thousands of dollars you're cutting out of my salary. Like, I would go through the entire benefits package and go side by side, show me the differentials, because a lot of times it's hidden there. And that's a way for companies to, I guess, cut costs, is say, okay, we'll give you a high salary, but we're not going to give you any much in the way of benefits. And nobody ever asks, how much is my health insurance when they ask for a job? And how much is it for me and my spouse and my kids?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny because it's just the opposite. Salary's more expensive to pay than benefits for companies because you have to pay FICA. You have to pay taxes on it. Benefits, you don't have to pay taxes on. So it actually, employees tend to prefer having a high number base salary. And the base salary is actually more onerous for the employer in most cases because you have to pay that extra 7.65% of every dollar to match their Social Security and Medicare. So it's much cheaper for us to pay for health insurance instead of giving someone a raise. The problem is if you don't do the raise, then people feel like they're not being, their work isn't being appreciated and they're not making as much as their neighbor. And little do they know their neighbor's paying $1,500 a month for health insurance for the family, but they're not looking at that. They're only looking at what is your salary. And it's a conundrum. It is helpful that we're in the financial business and our employees are therefore in the financial business and have some idea how that works. That's very helpful to us selfishly. But in a lot of cases, it's really not something people think. The fact that you were looking at the 401k match and the fact that you were looking at your out-of-pocket cost for health insurance, by the way, does not have anything to do with what it costs the employer to have you there. It had everything to do with what's in it for me or what's it costing me. I contend most employees don't care what it costs the employer. They only care how it's going to impact them personally.
I agree with you. I mean, I wasn't worried about what it was costing them, but I wanted to know, how is that changing how much I get and what does that look like?
Of course.
Because it varies widely by employer. Yeah. And if you're not looking at the total package, then you're leaving a ton of money on the table. And if you're a higher income worker, you again are, like you said, you make 100,000, you take home 70, but everyone spends like they make 100, but they only get 70. And they don't realize now when I have to go pay for X, it's going to cost me that much more because I already gave away a chunk of it. Whereas if my employer pays for it, then I can get it at a discount, the tax discount. So
that mostly comes down to behavior, though.
It does.
Are you overspending? Are you spending your gross and then having a tax problem? People do it. It is challenging to see small business owners, especially, who are always a quarter behind on taxes. And they have to go earn the money that they just had to pay in taxes because they don't have it. And quarterly taxes aren't a surprise. You know they're coming. You even know what they are. So if you choose not to save for them and then to say, oh my gosh, look what's due on Tuesday, it's going to be a problem.
It is. And I work with a lot of small business owners. And the number one thing we do, we save for taxes so that it makes it easy. We always like to get people to take action. Based on our conversation today, what's an action step people could take this week to move forward?
The action step is to take inventory. Figure out where you are. It is absolutely financially, it is absolutely impossible to figure out how to get where you want to go until you know where you are, and be real honest with yourself. And if you're married, be real honest with your spouse or significant other. Because if you don't have your hands around your balance sheet and your own income statement, just like you would if you were looking at a business, if you haven't done that, you owe it to yourself to know where you are. You cannot improve upon something or build a plan to get somewhere until you know where you're starting. It's like a "you are here" sticker on a map. So start with inventory and do it today.
And once you know where you are, pick your target. And now it becomes very, very easy to get from where you are to where you want to go because we know what we're looking for. And it becomes easy to turn off everything that's not taking us in that direction.
Bingo.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
My secret to living an abundant life is spending as much time at the beach as possible. The combination of vitamin D, sand between my toes, and that sound feels abundant no matter what beach it is.
Can I bring a book and a beer?
You can bring a book and 6 beers. Just don't bring 6 books and a beer.
Oh, well, yeah, it gets hot, so you'll need a couple extras. What did you learn later in life that you wish you'd have learned sooner?
The value of meditation, yoga, and self-care. The value of your thoughts becoming your reality. I think I pushed myself real hard and to such fatigue that it was not good for me, my relationships, my health, or anything else. And so I think finding mindfulness and finding the ability to slow down and really breathe made a huge difference.
One of those things they, again, forget to teach us in school.
Correct. Not there.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Find something you absolutely love and go do it, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Even if your parents don't agree?
To heck with them. And I say that as the father of a teenager who's someday going to say, this is what I want to do. If you find your passion and you find your calling, and it makes it, assuming it's legal and you can pay, make a payment on it, but find something you love to do and go do it. Do not settle for the path that you think you have to be on. Just because your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were dentists doesn't mean you have to be a dentist. Just because your mom and your sister and your mother-in-law are lawyers doesn't mean you have to go to law school. You be you. Find something you love and go do it and be great at it.
I agree 100% with you. That's what it's all about. Too many people follow the wrong path, and then they wonder why they're miserable. If people would like to learn more about you, find the book, what's the best way for them to do that?
The book's available on Amazon or any place you buy books. If you'd like to know more about us, go to brotmanmedia.com. You'll find the podcast, the books and workbooks and courses and all the resources. And it'll also provide a link to our financial planning firm as well if you have interest in our services. But brotmanmedia.com would be the first step.
And we'll make sure to put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's been fun. Hey, we agreed on a lot more than we disagreed on. I thought maybe there'd be some fighting, but it didn't happen. So, no, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great news. Dr. Brad Klontz, who we talked about, will be on the podcast in a few weeks. It's going to be a great episode. There's a little surprise in there for all of you. You can also go back and listen to Daniel Crosby's episode. It's number 60, and it's quite timely for what's happening in the markets right now. I followed this advice of graduating in life to do what I love on my terms. Having financial freedom allows this to happen, but I don't want to stop working because I'm having more fun. We're making more than ever, so it's not a sacrifice. It's actually amazingly fun and rewarding. The truth is, retirement sucks. It sends you out to pasture. This doesn't mean you need to work 40 hours a week. You don't. So, what steps can you take to build a life where Monday morning is amazing? If you follow me on Facebook, you see my posts every Monday. Happy Monday. Sometimes I forget I say happy Friday because Monday, Friday, they're all the same. This week's action step: to create an inventory of your financials, build your balance sheet and income statement. It's the basics of what we talk about. And I shared all of this back in episode 7. I hope you've already done this. I've been doing this for over 30 years. Just tracking, measuring, and taking steps forward. Don't forget that mindfulness and meditation are a big part of life, as Eric mentioned at the end. We've done many episodes dedicated to that very topic. It was kind of our action step from last week. Next week, we've got Pascal Bachman, The Power of a Strategy in Life and How to Find Fulfillment. I know you're going to love it. Hey, who do you know that could benefit from listening to this episode? Would you do me a favor? Would you share it? I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.